All right. Who did your homework last week? Who remembers we had homework for last week? I'm gonna start taking notes from now on. All right. You were supposed to read all four gospel accounts of the crucifixion. Remember? But since you didn't do that, we'll just go ahead and move on. But we're
Does
going to
it
be
count if you're already familiar with them, so you didn't have to reread them?
nope, that don't
I was
count.
gonna say, Jenny, before this church, I think my previous three churches only stayed in the gospel, so I feel like I know them like the back of my hand.
I don't know them like the back of my hand. You never know them like the back of your hand. But all right, I'm gonna forgive you this one time. And I don't believe I have homework for you tonight. But last week we were in Psalm 22, which is the Messianic Psalm. Psalm 22, 23, which we probably all are familiar with, and in Psalm 24 form a trilogy about Christ. Psalm 22, which is what we looked at last week, is about the suffering of Christ, the suffering servant. It's about the crucifixion of Jesus that David wrote 1,000 years before it happened, 500 years before crucifixion was even invented. And it talks about the suffering of Christ on the cross and his resurrection. If you'll recall there at the end of Psalm 22, that God will not allow his servant his body to see decay and all of that. So Psalm 22 is about the crucifixion and the resurrection of the Messiah. Psalm 23 is about the Messiah's role after his resurrection, and that is as the good shepherd. So everybody familiar with Psalm 23? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. There, I see one shaking head, but everybody else is black and I can't hear you. So I'm going to assume that you are familiar with the 23rd Psalm. The 23rd Psalm, when looked at in this trilogy, is talking about Christ at post-resurrection. What does Christ do after the resurrection? What is the Messiah doing after the resurrection? And the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in a path of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you art with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So that's what he's currently doing post-resurrection and post-ascension. He is acting as our good shepherd to guide the church. He is the head of the church. He is guiding the church, and all of those things that David lists in the 23rd Psalm apply to the church and apply to all of God's people during this period when Christ, between the two advents. So any question about Psalm 22 and 23 before we move on to Psalm 24? Okay, Psalm 24 in the trilogy. Remember I talked 22, 23, and 24 form a unit, a trilogy. Psalm 22 is about the crucifixion and resurrection of the Messiah. Psalm 23 is about the work of the Messiah post-resurrection. Psalm 24 is talking about the Messiah in his kingship. The Messiah is the king. So Psalm 24, if you want to relate it to eschatology, it's talking about the second coming. But there's some very interesting things about the 24th Psalm. When the nation of Israel was in exile in Babylon, they began a habit that carried through, and I'm pretty sure, I'm not going to say for certain, but I'm pretty sure in Orthodox synagogues all over the world, this still holds true. For every 7 days of the week, they would read particular scriptures. On Sunday, the first day of the week, they read Psalm 24 because Psalm 24 talks about the creation of the world. And so they celebrated the creation of the world on the first day when God spoke the universe into existence. And so they read Psalm 24. Now, what do we as Christians, what do we know about Sundays? Specifically, 2 Sundays.
Day of rest.
It's the day of rest, but I'm talking specifically coming up on the calendar here in the spring. There's a couple of Sundays. Actually,
I mean,
3 Sundays.
Resurrection Sunday,
Do what?
Resurrection Sunday.
Resurrection Sunday. And Jen Georgial still on?
Palm Sunday.
Palm Sunday. Yes, Palm Sunday and Resurrection Sunday. So let's look, and the triumphal entry, or Palm Sunday, the story of Palm Sunday, is in all 4 Gospels, and all those stories that are in all 4 Gospels are important stories. So let's turn back to the Gospels, Gospel of Luke, and let's read about the triumphal entry. And this will make sense in a minute, I hope. Chapter 19 of the Gospel of Luke, beginning in chapter 28. And when he had said these things, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. When he drew near to Bethphage and Bethany, at the mount that is called Olivet, that's the Mount of Olives. It's on the eastern side of the city of Jerusalem. You come down the Mount of Olives through the Kidron Valley, straight to the eastern gate of the temple complex. Okay, so you can stand on the Mount of Olives even today and see the Temple Mount. It's just due east of the Temple Mount. It's not far. Bethany and Bethphage is maybe just a few miles, right? You go over the Mount of Olives, and the ancient towns of Bethany and Bethphage were right there on the other side of the Mount of Olives. That's where Mary, Martha, and Lazarus lived, if you'll recall. So, just so you know the topography of what we're talking about. When he drew near to Bethphage and Bethany at the mount that is called Olivet, he sent 2 of his disciples, saying, "Go into the village in front of you, where on entering you will find a colt tied, on which no one has ever sat. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' you shall say this, 'The Lord has need of it.'" So those who were sent went away and found it just as he had told them. And as they were untying the colt, its owner said to them, "Why are you untying the colt?" And they said, "The Lord has need of it." And they brought it to Jesus, and throwing their cloaks on the colt, they set Jesus on it. And as he rode along, they spread their cloaks on the road. As he was drawing near, already on the way down the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of his disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." And some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." He answered, "I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out." That's a strange statement that Jesus makes. What do you mean the very stones will cry out? Well, you can turn back to Daniel chapter 9. In Daniel chapter 9, the prophecy of the 70 weeks that God gives us through Daniel the prophet, talks about the time that the Messiah will show up in Jerusalem. So when you look at, there's 69 weeks and then another week, and you do all that math, and it's 483 years. And then you've got to convert it from 360-day years to 365-day years. But you do all that fancy, complicated math, which will make that Jenny's homework for next week, since she has you got an accounting degree from a fine university, Texas A&M. Make them proud. It equals out to Palm Sunday, the year that Jesus shows up. So you do all of that math from Daniel chapter 9. Daniel chapter 9 says there's going to be this 483-year interval before the Messiah shows up in Jerusalem. It turns out it's Palm Sunday that Luke has just told us about. So when Jesus says, "I tell you the truth, if these don't proclaim me the King, the very rocks will proclaim me the King." Why? Because this is the day God said his King will come. Yes, Chris.
So to save Jenny some homework, I plan on teaching Daniel anyway after track.
Don't say homework. She didn't do her homework for this week.
But yeah, so I'm going to be covering like the 70 sets of 7 and like the whole Daniel prophecy, probably like late spring, early summer.
All right. Well, we need it next week, Jenny. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. A lot of smarter people than me have done the math. And so, but it does work out to Palm Sunday, the year that Jesus shows up in Jerusalem. Now, why did I say all of that? Because I want you to go back and understand what is happening at the temple at that very moment. When Jesus is topping the Mount of Olives, being placed on that foal of a donkey, which is a prophecy from Zechariah 9, I believe, where the king will come lowly, riding on a humble, lowly, riding on a donkey. It's a prophecy of the Messiah, which Matthew points out in his account. At that very moment, Psalm 24 is being read in the temple courts by the very people who would reject Jesus as the king, as the Messiah. So let's read Psalm 24 and then talk about it a little bit. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Get my right glasses on. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. For he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers. Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false, and does not swear deceitfully. He will receive blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. Such is the generation of those who seek him, those who seek the face of God, the face of the God of Jacob. Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord, strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O gates, and lift them up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. A lot of important things here in Psalm 24. The first thing we understand and see is that everything belongs to God. That's what the psalmist declares. The whole world is the Lord's. The whole earth is the Lord's, and everything that is contained in the world or the earth is the Lord's. Then in verse 3, who shall ascend the hill of the Lord? I don't know why the ESV and the NIV, I think, translate that hill. Most often it's translated mountain or mount, which I think the Net Bible does. I think the CB Bible does. Verse 3 should read, who shall ascend the mount of the Lord? And when you talk about the mount of the Lord, what mount is he talking about? He's talking about the Temple Mount, right? He's Jesus, and look at the visual in your mind. Here comes Jesus in sight of that very Temple Mount where these words are being read, riding on a donkey, as Zechariah said, declaring to those who are gathered around him that, yes, indeed, I am the Messiah. Because if these don't proclaim it, the rocks will proclaim it. I'm the Messiah. And at the very same time, the people, the priest in the temple, which is facing the Mount of Olives. Remember, Jesus is going down the Mount of Olives straight to the eastern gate of the temple. Straight to the eastern gate of the Temple Mount. Here he comes. And the priest is crying these words. Who can ascend to the mount of the Lord? Well, it's only him who's perfect. Isn't that what it says? He says, who shall ascend the mount of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false, and does not swear deceitfully. He will receive blessings from the Lord, and his righteousness from the God of his salvation. Such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek the face of the God of Jacob. David, so many years before this event happens, is talking about this moment in time where the Messiah is approaching the Mount of God. And the priest in the temple are proclaiming, who can ascend to the Mount of God? Well, here he comes. He's lowly and riding on a donkey, and he's headed right for you. He's coming into the temple right now. And then the psalmist says, lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Anybody remember the old Third Day song? Well, some of y'all are too young to remember them. When Third Day first came, anybody know who Third Day is, for crying out loud? It's a Christian group.
Yep.
One of their early songs, the King, who is this King of glory? Has anybody ever heard it? Showing my age. It's a great song. Y'all should go look it up. Who is this King of glory? And a rhetorical question that the psalmist asks is immediately answered. He's the Lord Almighty. Who is the King of glory that is coming to stand in the holy place of God upon his holy mountain? Who is the Messiah? He's the Lord Almighty. There's no mistaking what the psalmist is saying. Who is this King of glory that the gates are supposed to open up for, that they're supposed to lift up their hearts in praise for? Who is the King of glory? He's the Lord Almighty. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. It's not talking about it's just some human that he picked up out of David's line. No, who's the Messiah? Who's the King of glory? Who is the one that the psalmist had been talking about the whole time that God is going to send? The king, the king after the image of David, in the lineage of David, to sit on David's throne forever. When David told Nathan that he was going to build God a temple, because I forgot to mention something. The occasion, most people think the occasion, and Jewish tradition hold that the occasion that David wrote this psalm was when he brought the Ark of the Covenant back from Obed E something's house. I forget what, Obed-E something, and some other letters. Jenny probably knows. She's shaking your head like she does. And moved it to the tabernacle, which was on the Temple Mount, the future Temple Mount. He had set up the tabernacle there in Jerusalem on the current day Temple Mount. Remember, the tabernacle was the tent that followed them through the wilderness. And he returned the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem. And that's where Jewish tradition holds. This is when David wrote this psalm. And so he's talking about the Ark of the Covenant. And if you remember, if you were here when we went through the book of Exodus, who is the Ark of the Covenant symbolic for? It's acacia wood covered in gold. God and man together. We got the broken law inside it. Right? It's covered by the mercy seat. Jesus. The Ark of the Covenant is Jesus. That's what it was symbolic of in the tabernacle. And all that Jesus would do is wrapped up in that Ark of the Covenant. Right? It's got the Aaron's rod that budded, symbolizing the resurrection. We're going to have another lesson over this. I can see, well, I can't see most of y'all's faces, and that's rude. Anyhow, David writes this when he is bringing the Ark of the Covenant to the Temple Mount, to this very Temple Mount where the priest is standing on the steps of the, very good, I like it, where the priest is standing on the steps of the temple proclaiming his words. Who is the King of glory? Who can come into the Mount of God and stand in the holy place? That's exactly where the Ark of the Covenant went. And the psalmist is saying, who can do that? Only the Messiah. And who is the Messiah? The Messiah is Lord. He is God. He is Jehovah. Who is this King of glory? He is Jehovah the Mighty. Remember when you look in your typeface in the scripture and you see Lord is all caps, in all capital letters, instead of just the L capitalized? That means it's translating Jehovah, the personal name of God, not just like you would say, oh, yes, my Lord, right? That's a lowercase. That's a capital L with lowercase letters. If it's all caps, that you just automatically translate that in your mind, it's Jehovah. So he says, who is the King of glory? It's Jehovah, strong and mighty. Jehovah, mighty in battle. Who is the King of glory? The man coming down that mountain on the donkey. It's Jehovah in the flesh, as Isaiah prophesied. So that's chapter 24. Questions on chapter 24? And Kelly, can you answer me? Can you take yourself off mute real quick?
Yes.
Did you
Hello?
do your homework for this week?
What?
Did you do your homework for this week?
Bad signal, bad signal.
Oh, Kelly, I was so counting on you to put these other ones to shame.
No, Pastor, I was telling Terry when we were going out to eat tonight, I was like, oh man, there was some homework we were supposed to do. And
You even asked me about it. You even asked me
What's
about
that?
it. You even asked me about it.
I know I was ready to do it on Saturday and I should have just done it. I should have done it when I was asking about Sunday because I thought it was for Sunday.
I was going to use you to put these youngsters to shame, but you've let me down.
I know now I've been shamed. But anyway, my sincere apologies for my lack of academic.
No worries. All right. Let's turn over to Psalm 40. And we'll finish up tonight with Psalm 40. While we're in Psalm 40, somebody turn over to Hebrews chapter 10, verses 5 through 9, and put their thumb in there, or finger in there. Verse 1, Psalm 40, I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the pit of destruction out of the miry bog and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Anybody want to take a stab at what the first three verses are talking about? Considering we're looking at the Messianic Psalms. So these Psalms are about the Messiah. I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry and drew me up from the pit of destruction out of the miry bog and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Many will see what and fear?
Is this talking about the resurrection?
Yeah, he's raised him up from the dead. He's raised him from the bog. Right? He heard his cry and raised him from the bog and set his feet securely on the rock. And many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust, who does not turn to the proud, to those who go astray after a lie. You have multiplied, O Lord my God, your wondrous deeds and your thoughts towards us. None can compare with you. I will proclaim and tell of them, yet they are more than can be told. In sacrifice and offering you have not delighted, but you have given me an open ear. Burnt offering and sin offering you have not required. Then I said, behold, I have come. In the scroll of the book it is written of me, I delight to do your will, O my God. Your law is within my heart. I have told the glad news of deliverance in the great congregation. Behold, I have not restrained my lips. As you know, O Lord, I have not hidden your deliverance in my heart. I have spoken of your faithfulness and your salvation. I have not concealed your steadfast love and your faithfulness from the great congregation. Who's got Hebrews chapter 10?
I have it.
Will you read chapter 10, verses 5 through 9?
Therefore, when he comes into the world, he says, but a body you have prepared from, oh, I'm sorry, I missed something. Therefore, when he comes into the world, he says, sacrifice and offering you have not desired, but a body you have prepared for me. In whole burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin, you have taken no pleasure. Then I said, behold, I have come. In the scroll of the book, it is written of me, to do your will, O God. After saying above, sacrifices and offerings and whole burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin, you have not desired, nor have you taken pleasure in them, which are offered according to the law. Then he said, behold, I have come to do your will. He takes away the first in order to establish the second.
All right, so what's the author of Hebrews telling us? The author of Hebrews is telling us how to properly understand Psalm 40, isn't he? This passage of Psalm 40, the author of Hebrews is applying it directly to the Messiah. Psalm 40 says, I have come. In the scroll of the book, it is written of me. Isn't that what Jesus says to the Pharisees? Hey, if you believe Moses, you believe me, because Moses wrote about me, right? The whole Old Testament is about Christ. But specifically, this psalm is used by the author of Hebrews to prove the point that God didn't desire those bloody sacrifices, that he took no pleasure in those sacrifices, that those sacrifices were a means to an end to point to the ultimate sacrifice that would reconcile all things. And that's what the author of Hebrews says. Hey, he said all that to say, did away with those things to bring in the new, to bring in the better. That's the whole point of the book of Hebrews, isn't it? That Jesus is superior and he brings a superior covenant. Right? He starts the book of Hebrews. Jesus is superior to Moses. He's superior to the angels. He's superior to Abraham. He's superior to the Aaronic, the priesthood after the order of Aaron. He's a priest after the order of Melchizedek, and so on and so forth. that he brings a better covenant, that he does away with the old covenant by fulfilling the old covenant and institutes a better covenant. Well, that is implied in Psalm 40, 1,000 years before Jesus shows up on the scene, by King David. And then he says, I have told the glad news of deliverance in the great congregation. Behold, I have not restrained my lips. As you know, O Lord, I have not hidden your deliverance within my heart. I have spoken of your faithfulness and your salvation. I have not concealed your steadfast love and your faithfulness from the great congregation. In other words, Jesus saying, I came because it was written in the book of me that I would come, and I did what I was supposed to do. I did your will. I did perfectly your will. Remember when Jesus says that to his disciples? I can only do what the Father allows me to do. I can only do what the Father tells me to do. I'm here to do the Father's will. And this is the Father's will, and I will do the Father's will perfectly. And that's what he did. As for you, in verse 11, as for you, O Lord, you will not restrain your mercy from me. Your steadfast love and your faithfulness will ever preserve me. For evils have encompassed me beyond number. My iniquities have overtaken me that I cannot see. They are more than the hairs of my head, and my heart fails. Verse 12. What evils? What sins? In verse 11 and 12. Or in verse 12. For evils have encompassed me beyond number. My iniquities have overcome me that I cannot see. They are more than the hairs of my head. My heart fails me. We know that the Messiah didn't sin, right? Somebody shake their head, yes. The Messiah never sinned. But he became sin for us. Isn't that what Paul tells us? He made him who knew no sin, who had never experienced sin. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, so that we may have or become the righteousness of God. So he's talking about on the cross, every sin that has ever been committed was piled upon Jesus, the innocent Messiah. Be pleased, O Lord, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste to help me. Let those be put to shame and disappointed altogether who seek to snatch away my life. Let those be turned back and brought to dishonor who delight in my hurt. Let those be appalled because of their shame, and who say to me, Aha, aha. But may all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. May those who love your salvation say continually, Great is the Lord. As for me, I am poor and needy, but the Lord takes thought of me. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, oh my God. So Psalm 40, again, is talking about the Messiah as he would fulfill the calling that God had placed upon his life, that he would come, that was written in the scroll, that he would come and he would proclaim the good news of the gospel. He would talk about God's salvation and God's mercy and God's steadfastness and God's steadfast love to humanity. And then he would suffer and die and bear the sin of the world. But God would again rescue him. And then all who sought God would be saved. So that's Psalm 24 and 40.
Hey, so what about David?
What about David?
What is his what's his situation? And is there a tradition, Jewish tradition on where he was or what he was doing when he wrote the song?
When he wrote Psalm 40, I don't know of any. That just seemed to be, maybe he was going through something. I don't know, because most of the time David writes these Psalms, not all the time, but these type of Psalms where he's talking about his trouble and all of those, he's going through something. But this is not specified. And I don't know of any Jewish tradition that, I didn't really look that up. I looked up Psalm 24. I don't know why I didn't look it up for Psalm 40, but I could do that. But I don't know if it's not attributed to any. Oftentimes in a Psalm, if they are linked to a specific event, it listed a Psalm of David when he was in the cave, right? Or a Psalm of David when this happened or that happened. But these just say a Psalm of David.
Okay.
It's an indicator when it's a Psalm of David and it's not linked to a specific incident in the life of David, that there's a messianic flavor to it. In other words, it's a dual fulfillment. Yes, indeed, it's talking about David, but ultimately it's talking about the Messiah. And David himself acknowledges elsewhere in the Psalms that, yes, the Holy Spirit is, the Holy Spirit speaking to me. right? So he understood himself that, yes, what I'm writing is scripture and it is ultimately about something more than me, right? Any other questions?